Sissejuhatuseks siis nii palju, et meie peakülaline on Ewa Westermark, tuleb Gehli büroost Taanis, kus nad on siis tegelenud juba tegelikult 60ndate lõpust sellega, et saada inimesed tänavale. Ja Ewa siis juba räägib ise, miks nad arvavad, et see on oluline. Ja räägime täna inglise keeles põhiliselt. Et ma mõtlesin, et pärast ettekannet siis, kui on soovi, ma võin teha väikse lühikokkuvõtte eesti keeles ja kui me arutellu langeme, siis saame ka tõlkida, aga tervet seda ja tunni ajast loengut ma ei tahaks hakata siin eesti keelt tõlkima, muidu me lihtsalt kaotame Ewa väärtuslikku aega. Aga annangi sõna Ewale.
Thank you. I have no idea what you said.
Well, I just welcomed you and told you that you're going to be telling us how you've worked in Denmark since actually, or Jan has worked since the end of the 60s with getting the people back to the streets, and why and how you do it, you will tell us.
Thank you very much.
In Estonia.
Sorry.
And you do it in Estonia.
Oh, I wish I could. I think I'll do this. So, thank you so much for inviting me. It's the first time back in Tallinn since mid-80s, late 80s. It was quite a different city, as I remember. I was I think I was 17 or something, taking romantic black and white photographs of the city center. So I'm really excited to be back, and I'm very happy to be invited. And thank you for taking your valuable Sunday time to be here. So I'll just briefly tell you where I come from. I work at this office in Copenhagen called Gehl Architects, and we're quite a small office, multidisciplinary, so we're architects and we're landscape architects and planners and sociologists. This is our office party where we basically pay one of the parking spaces in the courtyard for a day, and then we have a party. And we're quite young and optimistic practice. This is the 16 babies that were born in 2010, and we're just 30 employees. So I'd like to think that we're very optimistic, and now is the time you have to try to guess which one is mine. It's the cutest one, of course. Lots of hair. They're all cute, of course. We would like to think we're young. I mean, we're basically 40, around 40, but as a planner architect, I think you can still call yourself young at that age. But what we do, what we focus on, is really to study and to find out why some people that might be all well designed, but they become deserted and lifeless and maybe even unsafe places to be, while other places can really invite people to spend time so they become inclusive and inspiring, and really safe and lively. And what is it that makes a difference between these types of spaces? And what is it that actually makes people want to bicycle even though it rains or if it's snow? What is it about the space, about the city, that actually invites us to do things that we might not think is possible today? And this started early, in the 60s. You can see these images are old. When Jan Gehl, who is a founder partner of the firm, he started to study the relationship between the built form and people's behaviors, and as you can see, and as you know, it really influenced each other. And he started in the 60s. It actually started as a love story, because Jan Gehl, who was an architect at that time, he met his wife, and she was an environmental psychologist. And she asked him, what is it about you architects, about you planners? Why don't you care about people? Why don't you actually know things about people? I mean, you build these environments, you build these cities that shapes our lives, and maybe this is not the way we like to live. So he started really to think twice about, what do we actually know about people? What is the foundation of building a city? What is the knowledge that we base our city development on? And this was, of course, in this time in the 60s, where the car was the newest, biggest thing in the cities, and we started to form our cities to actually make space for cars, to make the cars happy. And also the time for the modernism, where we really thought of city planning as something you did from maybe 5,000 meters above from an airplane, making nice patterns or trying to make a form that would really be the new type of life, but we didn't really know whether people would actually live this type of life that people believed that this type of environments would create. So our office base our work on this 40 years of knowledge that has then resulted in a few books, and the most famous one is the one on top here, Life Between Buildings. And that was a book that Jan Gehl wrote in '71, and it's been translated, I think, into 22 different languages today. And it's still actually, what's the word, accurate or valid. Thank you. So whatever we do, whether we work with city strategies or master planning, we really try to have that as a foundation. The knowledge we have about life and people. And this is Jan Gehl. I think you can guess which one. When the release of some of his books in China, and that was fairly recent, so he usually says that they haven't had time to read them yet. Or maybe have tried to read them, so they name their places differently, the charming new city, but they haven't really been able to actually implement some of these ideas, some of this thinking. But we can see that there is a new paradigm shift, or shift in paradigm, where people actually demand a different type of city. We demand a city that is lively, attractive, safe, sustainable, and healthy. But in order to do so, we really need to start with people. We need to get more knowledge about people and people's behavior and needs. And one thing we've found is, of course, that cultures are really different wherever we go in the world. Climates are different. I know you have quite harsh winters here. But actually, the way we are, as human beings, inhabit space is fairly similar. We like to have something to shield our back so no bear comes and grabs us. I mean, this is really inherent. We like to enjoy the sun if we're in a climate like this, or the shade if we're in Asia. We like to meet other people. We like to be able to walk and congregate. I mean, this is very sort of basic things that we as human beings really want to do. And it goes back to all of us actually being a walking animal. I mean, we are people that has developed as people as walking. And maybe you guys who have kids, or if you know your friends' kids, you know it's a big day, the day your kid walks. I mean, it's, you call your grandparents, hey, look, he's walking, he's walking. It is really something very fundamental to us as human beings. And walking is a slow pace. It's maximum 5 kilometers an hour. And all our senses, package of senses, has of course developed through this slow pace walking person. So we know that all our senses are really, really important, our smell and our hearing. But one thing that is interesting is that actually 75% of all our, what's the English word? All our impressions comes from eyesight. And because we learned to walk when there weren't roads everywhere, or pavement, or asphalt, you know, it's slightly angled down. We have to check out where we put our steps. So basically, what we see, what we experience most, the biggest thing when we walk around in our city is a pavement, the first 3-4 meters of the facade. That is what matters most to us. And I think when you look at historically, they kind of knew this. This is from Edinburgh, and you can see that the first floor, the ground floor, they've really put a lot of effort in. Details, gold, things that would stimulate us, that would interest us to actually look into the window and then actually go into shop. But above that, it's a really simple building. You know, maybe it's not, that's not where we should focus our effort and money, because this is what matters most to us as walking animals, as people in the city. And then somehow that was lost. This is in Copenhagen, one of the most fantastic architects and designers, Arne Jacobsen, the National Bank, and it's the finest Serrano marble. I mean, it's actually wonderful to touch. But it really, as human beings, we've in our mind walked this path even before we even started it. Our minds actually needs one stimuli every 4 seconds. If we don't get that, we get bored. We're not stimulated. We don't feel comfortable. And what's interesting is that if we have an environment that actually makes us stop, makes us want to have a rest, maybe engage in a conversation, this attracts more people. You can see the girl biking, she's even turning her head because she sees that there are people there. There must be something interesting. I also want to join. So there's this double effect. Because one other thing we know about people is that we are social creatures. We need each other. We need to engage with each other. And other people are actually the biggest attractions in cities. It's not buildings. I mean, we don't really go into cities to look at architecture unless we are an architect. The only people you see ever looking up, they're architects, or maybe bird watchers. But other people is really the core biggest attractions in our city. And this is, of course, I think you have a similar situation here in the Old Town. This is from Stockholm Old Town. You see these people sitting here enjoying a coffee, and they pay 10 euros for that coffee. I don't know, you told me you pay 4 euros in the Old Town here. But I mean, how much do you pay for a coffee at home? Nothing, basically nothing. But that's not why you sit there. You sit there because you can actually look at other people. And you're maybe not even sitting comfortably, because this is a nice environment to spend. Maybe most of them are tourists. I mean, that's another issue we can talk about. But to summarize, you could actually start talking about different environments that appeal to our senses, that invites us to walk, that invites us to actually interact with other people. We could call that 5-kilometer architecture, or 5 kilometers in our environment. It has many details, it's rich in sensitivity, and you hear noises, you smell great things, whether it's in Venice or in Malmö in Sweden. And I think when you Google Tallinn, of course, the 300 first images that come up is the Old Town. And you have this fantastic Old Town with all this scale, everything that I've talked about, this 5-kilometer in our environment, that I think is quite fantastic to have. Then we have the opposite. We have the environments that are not built for us as walking animals, but for the car. We have the 60 kilometers in our environment. You can see suddenly the scale change, because now we're moving fast, so the signs are bigger. The dimensions are bigger. It's not a space where maybe you'd like to walk, but it's rather a space where you'd like to move fast through. And it's definitely not a space that invites you to talk to other people. It might even be so that the dimensions are so wide that you don't even see. Let's say you have a square that is more than 40 meters wide. If someone you know walks on the other side, you wouldn't even recognize this person. So we really need these intimate dimensions in order to actually encounter people we know in the city, or see other faces, see expressions and feelings. And I hope I don't offend anyone, but I think you have these 60 kilometers an hour spaces in your city as well, whether they're in the new town or out in the suburbs. But of course, there is something about these environments that there's great effort and great, it might even be fantastic architecture, but unless the space actually helps us to want to walk, or to want to bicycle, or to want to talk to each other, it's not really a big success. Maybe another environment. I mean, it's possible to walk. There's dimensions to walk here on the sidewalk, but is the environment stimulating for you to walk further? What is the mental distance when you walk in an environment? Usually you can say that if you have lots of stimulation, etc., you tend to walk longer. You might even walk as far as 1.5 kilometers if it's really, really nice. If it's not, 1 minute and that's enough. So it really has an effect on our behavior. And of course, some of these new environment that we see, we have this focus on sustainability, and we have to have this focus. We see a lot of really good knowledge of how to build a sustainable building, or zero energy level building, or a LEED certified. There's lots of certification measures today. And this is from Copenhagen, Newtown, Ørestad. And you have the metro, and you have these new apartment buildings. But all these measures doesn't necessarily create a sustainable life if they don't invite you to actually move in a sustainable way. We might just end up having to drive to the gym and take the escalator up and go inside and just simulate sitting on a bicycle or simulate walking. And I think this is something we see in all cities, that you have areas in the city where you don't even have a choice. I mean, you need to use your car because you have to drive your kids to school because it's unsafe to be on the street. Or it might be safe to be in the street because of other traffic, because it's separated. But then it's unsafe because there's no eyes on the streets. And you have to use your car because there might not be public transportation, or the public transportation is not attractive enough. So we see this negative spiral of a lot of people's everyday life is a dependency in the car. And of course that creates lots of traffic because we need to move back and forth to our work. And the solution then to ease congestion is to build more roads. But if we know one thing for sure, the more roads we build, the more traffic will end up. So I think that it's important to remember that when we talk about creating a city for people with good public spaces, good streets, good networks, it's a lot more than the coffee. It's a lot more than a cafe latte on the street corner. It's really about creating mobility for everyone. And I mean, not everyone can ride a car. I don't know how many percentage is under 18 here, but there's usually quite a large percentage of the population. And when you get older, or if you can't afford having a car. So it's really a democratic mobility for all issue, to have a choice, to even have a choice, to use a different transport mode. And the sustainability dimension, we know that really good public transportation relies on good public space. And it's a lively, attractive dimension about creating a quality of life, livability issue in your city. The everyday life is key. It's not only the coffee on the Sunday, it's an everyday thing. And it's definitely a health dimension. And you probably all know how good it is to walk, whether it's just 30 minutes a day back and forth to your house or to your work. And again, can you give a natural way to exercise? You don't even have to go to the gym, maybe, because you do it in your everyday, and you don't have to spend 30 minutes in a congestion coming into work. You've already exercised on the way there. And it's not saying that the cars should all be gone. It's a matter of giving, again, a choice. Because I think in many cities today, you don't really have that choice. And we need to find a way to coexist, to use our spaces, our valuable spaces in our city for everyone and not singular use. There's of course a safety dimension to this. We know that if there's few people on the street, it becomes a much more unsafe street. And this great information and learning dimension. I love this image of this little guy playing the drums, and he's just standing there learning from the other guys. How do you do this? I mean, we learn by just watching other people, how they do, how they're dressed, how do they actually take in the world. And we have again now with this new type of work that we see, all research done on innovation says that the best way to be innovative is not to stay in your office, it's go out and meet things you didn't know existed, meet other people or talk to something that was unknown. And we see a lot more with the mobile society we are that we can actually work in our public spaces. So that's also a new thing about creating good public spaces in the city for just the work dimension. We have the classic economic dimension. I mean, usually really nice public spaces are very valuable by people, but of course also by property owners. I don't know one single case where a truly successful public space has done the opposite for a property owner or for business. And then maybe today also the very, very important dimension is the social dimension. That you talk to each other. We spend more and more time in our houses, more and more time connecting with other people through internet, so I think it's even more important today that we meet people in real life and that we meet people that are different from us. So it's not this scary thing that there are people of different kinds in the city. So it's very much an open society dimension to it. And that we have the right to also express our views and our values to other people. And then, of course, the sheer fun dimension. I mean, it's great. A really good public space actually makes you, surprises you. You don't really know what's going to happen. But the thing is that people are not really in the center of planning. We know that all cities have departments for traffic. And all cities, we can probably find out how many cars drive on this road. And there's also probably a prognosis of how many cars will drive there in 10 years' time or 15 years' time. But I don't know, maybe. You know how many people walk on the sidewalks on that same road. We don't have the same type of data on people in our city. We don't know what people are doing in the square. We don't know how many they are. We don't know who is there. And if we don't know this, of course it's very hard to base a decision if we don't have knowledge. Very few cities have city departments for public life, for instance. So we need really to have equal amount of focus on everything that is hardware, everything that is streets and buildings and parks, as on the software, which is people and cultures and behavior, life and activities. And one approach is to actually start collecting that data, to make the foundation for making better decisions, so we actually get the people perspective of our city. And this is not a very hard method to use. You can count, you can watch, you can register, and then actually just making it valuable in that system. And there's, of course, more and more cities that starts to realize, wanting to know more about their city lives. These are some of the cities that we have worked in. It's London, Melbourne, Sydney, New York, in China, and now latest was in Moscow. So I'd like to just give you a few examples from some of these cities and tell you a little bit about their approach, because of course every city is unique. So every city needs its own approach. I'll talk a little bit about Copenhagen. I mean, that's really where all the knowledge comes from the start, and where we live and work from day to day. I'll talk a little bit about Christchurch in New Zealand. And I'll talk about Moscow. I don't know if Moscow is in this category yet about a people-centered approach, because it's very new, but let's keep our fingers crossed. And then I'll end with a story from New York. So Copenhagen's approach has really been this about finding out more about people, about the life in the city, about the pedestrians, about everything that we might call soft values or soft issues. It's about studying what you care about, people. How many of you have been in Copenhagen? Quite a few. Great. And maybe that's why you're here. So you know this story. But the good thing about Copenhagen is that we've been able to study life for very many years. So the first public life and public space study was done in '68, and then '86, '95, and 2005. After this, they have continued, but we haven't done any of these studies, but the city itself are doing it themselves. But it's very interesting to be able to follow the change in life of the city and the change of the city itself. So then we can start comparing what are the actions we're taking, what effects are they actually giving on the life of the city. And I think also it's important to remember, if you've been there recently, I mean, this city with this fantastic, great public space network, lots of people walking and cycling, it hasn't always been like that. In 1962, when they talked about transforming their main street, Strøget, into a pedestrian street, people said, it's absolutely impossible, you cannot do this. I mean, the shops will die, we know that. The climate is wrong, we're not Italians, we don't have that great summers, we really need our car, we want to be inside. And it's definitely not our culture, Danish people, we're introverted, we don't really want to be out there. So it has all the classical arguments that we hear, I think in every city we go to, we hear these arguments. Then after actually making the pedestrian street and having then data to actually support, even though you can see it's packed with people, but knowing that there's 80,000 people every 24 hours in the summer, of course the shops they had a great time. The property owners had a great time. And really the climate wasn't an issue. I mean, it's even a lot of people when it's raining or in the winter time. I think the climate is 50% is the actual climate and 50% is between your ears. It's just the way you perceive your climate. And it wasn't only the main street, but they developed a complete network of pedestrian priority streets, not only pedestrianized street, but street like this. This is a side street of the main street, which became one of these shared space where you can actually drive. But it's kind of hard to get through, so you do it in a very, very slow pace. And because it's packed with bicycles and people, you can't drive fast, but you're allowed to. So there's this natural balance between different modes of use of this street. What we found through all these studies is a quite simple thing, because we could see that people chose to spend longer and longer time in the city. Not necessarily more people walking, but they spent more time. This is the same bench, longer and longer. And this very simple equation that the more space in Copenhagen that was given to people, to pedestrians, to public life, the more life actually came. So 4 times more space created 4 times more activity. And I think what's interesting now is that it's not only the city center, that's where it started, but it's spreading out, where it probably makes more effects, where it's even more needed to have these spaces. So you can see that around the city center, now there are cafes, there are public spaces, and also the streets, the more sort of arterial roads. They have changed into much more people-friendly roads where there's room for bicyclists and room for people walking, and also just a median in the middle that makes it easy to cross. And one interesting story, we had this woman from the Danish embassy, and she said, "Do you have a baby boom in Copenhagen?" We said, "I don't think so." And then we started thinking, why is this? Why is she asking this? And it's something about that children are really visible in the city center. They're wheeled around, whether it's their own bike or I think 30% of the families own one of these cargo bikes today in Copenhagen. And of course this is all due to that it's safe. You can see the bicycle lane on the left here, it's separated from traffic. So as a kid, and as a mother, maybe even more, you allow your kids to bicycle. You allow your kids to walk around in the city center. So they're very visible. And now they even take the sidewalks and the bicycle lanes across the side streets. So you can say to your children, they can almost walk only on the sidewalk all the way to school. So it's really a clear sign that here pedestrians and bicycles are a priority, and the cars have to really, really take care when they cross. And of course Copenhagen has now this very large connected network of bicycle lanes, not only in the city center, but out into the suburbs. And we can see that bicycling has actually doubled in the last 30 years. Now, at peak hour, there are more bicycles on the roads than cars. And it's much more than just transport. It's really something about everyone is bicycling. So here you have the complete family. The mother with the kid on the back, the young kid, the grandma, and then of course grandpa and father is further back. But it's really just an everyday thing. It's nothing special to use your bicycle. You don't wear lycra. It's just your everyday clothing. It's part of your everyday life. So the latest figures show that today there are 38% that bicycle to and from work. And that's not in the center, that's the whole greater Copenhagen. And only 35% or 22% use a car. 70% actually continues in the winter. And I'm not saying the winters are not as hard as they are here, but it can still be really, really not very nice. I bet you have nicer winters here actually, because you have real slow snow. No? Same? Okay. But it's something about making it really easy to use your bicycle. So if you don't live close to the city center, you can take your bicycle on the S-train or on the train, and then even on the metro you can take the bicycle. All the taxi drivers, they all have bicycle racks. So if you were late out one night and you don't feel like driving, or it starts pouring rain, you can actually just take a taxi with your bicycle home. So the transport system is completely integrated, it's not separated. And I think one interesting thing about the bicycle as a mental shift between driving your car, it's less of a step to start bicycling than to start using public transport, because there's more things that are similar. Go from your door to door, you choose when you go, you don't have to have a timetable, you just go when you want to go. And you're on your own. You can kind of use in Copenhagen, you use your bicycle to show off as much as if you have a really nice car. I mean, they spend so much money on their bicycles just because that's sort of the sign of who you are now instead of the car. So there are many things that actually are similar. You're independent on a bicycle as you are in a car. And I think if you ask Copenhageners, why do you bicycle? It's really interesting. It's nothing really to do with that it's environmentally friendly. It's only 5% says that that's why they bicycle. Almost everyone say it's the quickest, it's the fastest way to move around, it's the most convenient way. I mean, it's an option that I don't even think about. It's not a will thing, it's something that is very natural. Because the infrastructure is there, because the culture is there, and this has of course grown for quite a few years. So it's not only the physical infrastructure, it's as much campaigns. In school you learn to bicycle, you learn how to behave as a motorist with bicycles around. So as much again about the software as the hardware when it comes to growing this bicycle culture. It's of course really, really efficient. We know that space is limited in our cities. This is just an example of one of the streets leading into Copenhagen. And there's almost 5 times more people that can move per hour on a bicycle track compared to the traffic lane. So here we have the same amount of people on the track as in the car lanes. And of course the space is so much less. And Copenhagen is really good at trying to put figures again on what are the benefits for bicycling. This is from the recent 2012 bicycle account, where they tried to look at the complete socio-economical issue of bicycling compared to cars in the city or roads. And they say that for every 10 kilometers bicycled in Copenhagen, they earn 1.6 euros. While for every 10 kilometer traveled by car in Copenhagen, society lose 1.5 euro. And that includes health issues, includes actually building the infrastructure, includes lots of issues. But I think it's so important to try to visualize and quantify the benefits. And we know that it's really good for your health. They also state here that 30% reduction of mortality if you cycle to and from work. 1.7 billion Danish kroner, I think you have to divide it around 10 to get euros. So what would that make? 1.7 million? No. Who's good in math? A lot. We'll leave it at a lot. There is a lot of health gains, annual health gains with people bicycling. I think it's actually, they take these figures so seriously. Like the last one, when they calculate how much you actually gain for every cycled kilometer, that they were planning to build a new bicycle and pedestrian bridge across the river. And we realized that if we do this, people will have less distance to work and they will bicycle less kilometers. Is that really a good thing for us? Or shall we not? But then of course you have to calculate how many more will bicycle, but they take it that seriously that they actually thought that thought. And I think also they try to kill some of the, prejudices against bicycling. For instance, that it's not good for shops. And this is of course again based on a fully grown bicycle culture where lots of people have these cargo bikes. But they actually found out when they surveyed that there is more revenue to make from bicyclists than for cars. So let's move quite far south to Christchurch in New Zealand. This is a different story. They had a completely different approach to sort of lifting or focusing on the people-centered development of the city. And the reason why they have this approach is a very sad story, actually. Because they had an earthquake in 2011 that actually ruined more than 50% of their city center. And we worked there before the earthquake, and then we were invited again after to help on their recovery plan. And I think when it's been such a trauma, the municipality said that we cannot do this recovery plan without asking the people, because this needs to be the people city again. So they made a huge effort in actually going out and engaging people, asking what kind of city do you want, what kind of life do you want now after this trauma, what are the things that you actually valued most about your city, what do you want to be rebuilt. We don't have all the money in the world. If we had, we could rebuild all the old buildings that you treasure a lot, but we have to sort of prioritize. So we need to have your advice. What kind of city should we rebuild? And they talked about not only buildings, but they focused on life and spaces, and they asked a question. They had something they called share an idea. So basically you could, whether it was on internet or going to one of these events, you could actually go in and tell the city what you really valued most and what kind of city you wanted. They had 100,000 responses. That's 1/3 of their population. And I think that's quite impressive. And what they said when starting to navigate through all these 100 response, what was basically that they wanted green spaces. They wanted more spaces for people. They wanted less space for cars. They wanted more choices. So we built the plan around the actual needs of the people, making a green city. They wanted a low-rise city. There were lots of high-rise buildings that went down, but they wanted a low and compact city to have really close to all the amenities and close to each other, and to maybe value some of the historical buildings that was going to be rebuilt. They wanted a more compact city. They wanted more offers in the city, more spaces for people, more functions to choose from. And they wanted a more accessible city, more choice in terms of bicycling and walking and public transport. This is just some examples. This is their treasures Avon River. You can't even see, you couldn't really access. So one of the biggest things was to make that river part of the city center. This is one of their one-way streets, quite American grid structure in the city. Wanted to make them two ways, integrate green trees, making bicycle lanes, and also making the street a public space, a place where you could sit and stop and meet. And of course, they wanted something to happen now. So all these gaps in the cities, they made a big effort on trying to filling them with temporary interventions, just creating new spaces for people to meet, because all their meeting places were gone. They only had malls outside of the city center to meet in. This is my favorite one. It's called Dance-O-Mat. You attach your iPad, and then you pay a few cents, and the lights go on, and the music go on, and then you can dance for 5 minutes. Moscow. So I have this question mark. Love affair with cars or with people? So this is quite recent. 2011, when we were invited to look at the city and to see what the state of the city was. And this was at the time when Jan Gehl's in the office latest book, Cities for People, was published in Russia. And this is the city we met. It's a city filled with cars. The main street, you can't even see Krem because of all the signs, etc. You see the parked cars on the sidewalk. We were thinking, is this freedom after communism to park anywhere you want? Is that what it's all about? And before, the report is not yet completely published, but before we actually showed it to them, Jan Gehl met the mayor and he asked, what are you going to say about our city? Well, we might say something about the cars on the sidewalks, something about the cars really not making your beautiful city visible. Okay. So when we came back, 2013, suddenly cleared. You can see the old marks of the parking spots on the sidewalk. And again, this software, hardware thing, really trying to show, because it's a cultural thing. Excuse me. It's a cultural thing. When one car parks on the sidewalk, then everyone thinks they can do the same, right? So looking at the culture of it, actually towing it away right away when they do something wrong. So starting that new culture to grow. So this is a main street before and after. Quite quick solutions in some of the main spaces in the city center. This is so new, so I hope that people will eventually come. It looks absolutely deserted. And even putting in bicycling, this shared bicycle system, they don't have the infrastructure yet, so we'll just hope that it won't be a big blowback because of lots of accidents, etc. But again, they were really quick things that they tried to make to improve before we even told what we thought maybe could be done to the city. So what's the word when you try to, before you get criticized, you understand what I mean. Yeah, sorry? Oh, maybe. I won't say. Let's just hope that this continues, because of course this is city-centered things, and we surveyed quite a large portion of the city, and it's a lot about connecting different parts. So this is more of like an acupuncture thing that has happened. So I can't predict what will come in the future, but let's hope for the best. So the last story I'll tell is about New York. And this is, I think, a very interesting way of getting people's voices in a process, of changing your city in a very quick way, not having 40 years like Copenhagen to slowly transform, incremental. So action rather than words. They themselves call it a pilot project approach. And when I started working in New York, it was 2007, and we were invited by Department of Transport in the city of New York. And you might think, maybe some of you have been to New York, most of you probably, I mean, it's a great city. Why would we ever want to change anything with a city? But if you live there, and what they were facing was really a sense of urgency, because if they would continue the way they're moving, the way they're building, developing the city, they would have a complete gridlock on Manhattan. No cars would be able to move anywhere, basically. And they also saw that they were losing in competition to London, etc., because they couldn't provide a good quality of life. New York has the longest commuting times in all of America. People are pushed far away and they only work in the city center. They spend average 2 hours to commute to work. So things had to be done. And what they said was that actually 80% of the public realm is streets. And because we're so short of space, we need to really make use of our streets for something else than just moving from A to B. It could be something completely different. So let's think about how New York can develop these world-class streets. And Mayor Bloomberg was sort of the main person in this story, together with Jeanette Sadikan, who is a commissioner for Department of Transportation. A very, very fantastic, strong woman, a doer, as you say in America. What we found, what we surveyed, and what we were actually asked to do was to sort of prove why the city streets were underperforming, because they knew that already, but they wanted to get some of these data to support that. So for instance, one of the streets we surveyed, the sidewalks in many places are completely crowded. I mean, people walking out in the roadway to even fit. But then, looking at the complete situation of the street, we actually found that there are twice as many people on the sidewalk than the people inside the cars, but they have only 1/3 of the space. And for Mayor Bloomberg, this was sort of an eye-opener, because everyone votes. It's just that the people in the cars have more advocacy groups and more money to support their case, but there are actually more people on the sidewalks. We also found that the people in the streets, 10% were under 14 or over 65, but that's actually 30% of the population. So it wasn't very democratic space, because it was quite harsh, and people that are less tough wouldn't go out there. There's also streets that had very few seating opportunities. And this was, of course, deliberate, because they didn't want people hanging out in the street. It wasn't a good thing. And when we looked a little bit more closer, for instance, at this case, Times Square, we started wondering, could you actually call it a square? Only 11% of the actual space were for people. The rest was road width. So you can see all the people crowding here. I mean, if you have 35 million tourists every year, and you have this space to actually gather on. So, because it's America, because it's Mayor Bloomberg, maybe, they said, we don't have 40 years, we have 500 days, and you need to make something happen quickly. So what can we do? What they did was actually to create a lot of new temporary public spaces. They said, we don't have time to go through the whole process of engagement and asking people what do they want. And frankly, Jeanette Sadikan said that if we would have asked, what do you want to do with Broadway or Times Square, they would have gotten 9.4 million different answers. And they would never have been able to do this. So what they did was actually saying, let's try something temporary. let's see how it works. So with temporary things like planters, umbrellas, painting on the ground, doing this themselves almost overnight, almost like a guerrilla action. Closing roads, painting on the ground, creating new public spaces. So this was Times Square before, and this is after. And because it was such a huge demand of public spaces, they were filled in instantly, even though the quality was maybe not the most fantastic. You know, with simple chairs, painted ground that very quickly became quite dirty, but extremely well used. What you see is, of course, the tip of the iceberg. So even though it looks very simple, it was a lot of work done, you know, engaging people, stakeholder engagement, surveys, lectures, capacity building, etc. So they did these spaces all along Broadway, treating it differently, trying to see what is a life here. How can we help that life become better at this particular place? So up here, we actually had this bicycle lane. I tried riding on it. It was the most fearful thing I've ever done, I think. You know, there was parked car every 100 meters, need 4 parked car on the bicycle lanes. You had to go out in traffic. But what they did was that they made these public spaces as sort of a buffer from traffic, where people could actually sit and have a coffee, and then the bicycle lane became more protected. And down at Herald Square, we have Macy's, lots of people shopping. They made it a space where people who could sit and gather, and these are not cafe chairs, so you don't have to pay to sit there. They're actually public furniture. And Times Square, the same thing. And I think that the great thing about this was that instead of showing plans and asking people, they actually went out and did it to make people be able to experience the city in a different way. If we asked people before, they would never have wanted to sit in this space or in the street because it was really filled with traffic, lots of fumes from the cars, noisy. I shall get this. So it was really just making use of what they had already. I mean, the most sustainable thing you can do is to do as little as possible, to not build as much, but making better use of what you have. So for instance, the Flatiron building that before had these little concrete things where people stood and took photographs, suddenly you could actually sit there and experience these great wonders of the city. And this was really good, I mean, for just microeconomy. Now here's Broadway, you can see the buildings behind. There were lots and lots of vacant buildings along Broadway. You'd think it was like the main street of the world, but it wasn't really in a good state of repair. Really quickly, local initiatives arise. So this is this food market that popped up quite quickly afterwards. And because there were people here in the daytime, of course businesses picked up and said, this is a good way, a good place to locate it. In this case, the Marimekko main store that moved in. And then, of course, they sponsored the space and made these nice umbrellas. So it was also like a stimulation for private investment. So it wasn't only the city investing, but it had this multiple effect. And what I think is really great is that all these new users started to be appearing in these spaces. I mean, users like families, young and old, also locals. You see the guys in the suits? And I think maybe you know this. I don't know how many of you go into the old town when it's crowded with tourists, but there's something about you actually giving space back to the people that live there and work there. And I think now coming there is a much more genuine experience because it's not only tourists, it's a lot of them, of course, but it's not only tourists. So testing something in scale 1-to-1, giving people a chance to experience. So when they give feedback, they do that from real experience, not what you believe something would happen, because change is always scary. It will always be scary because you don't know what you get. You don't know how you will use it, if it will be as you expected. But here they could give them a chance to actually experience this and then say what they think. And it was all temporary, so if it wouldn't have been a success, they would take it away. So in that sense, it's, you know, it's a top-down thing, it's a guerrilla thing, but it was also humble enough to say that we don't know if this is the right answer. We'll have to talk to you guys first. So not only talking to them, but also surveying before and after. What were these changes actually doing to the life of the space? Suddenly they saw that actually a lot of less injuries occurred because there was more space for people and pedestrians. 63% decrease in injuries overall, I mean bicyclists and car traffic, accidents, etc. 84% increase in people lingering, people staying in the space. 42% of residents actually shopping more because it was a more pleasant experience, it wasn't too crowded with tourists. And people working in the area, 72% said they were very much more satisfied with the experience of Times Square. And 74% of New Yorkers said that Times Square had improved dramatically. So this, I think, in a way, was more valid comment because people had a chance to say it based on real-time experience. And not until they had those figures, Bloomberg announced that we will make this permanent. And I think also they have learned a lot, saying that these temporary things, they were not perfect. So we can also, before we invest a lot of money from the city, we know that what we do is, we know it will work better than if we just tried it from the start. And it wasn't only Times Square, this is usually what you show, but they also tried to anchor this approach in the whole city. So what they did was they created this plaza program, where people could apply. They had this toolkit of these umbrellas and planters and seating and epoxy color, etc. So people, local people, could see and find places in their own community. Hey, there's a place here, it could become something better. They could apply for this toolkit, and then some of these places you'd think was nothing could actually become a local meeting place. This is in the Bronx, and this is in Brooklyn. And I don't know if you have, but they have a lot of these slip lanes, a lot of these concrete islands. And suddenly you see lots of these public spaces actually appearing where people can sit and actually interact with the buildings rather than just sit on a little island outside in the traffic. So I think that my main message is that it's all about people. It's all about people. We have to listen to people's needs, but we also have to learn more about people. We have to find out, get more data on people. We have to get the right people in power, or the right people in the right places. It's also about the people that actually make things happen. So it's all about people, and I would never have dreamed of, experienced a snowball fight on Times Square when I started this project. And this is also the beauty of people, that you don't really, I mean, we cannot decide what people shall do or not do. We cannot force people to get up on a bicycle or sit on a bench or interact. We can invite them, and if we do that, it might happen. But we can definitely do the opposite. We can make it not possible to do things. So it's all about people. I think that was everything I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Ewa, for a wonderful presentation. I think, kas teeme väikse pausi, tahate teed võtta? Ja siis ma kutsun lavale Teele Pehki linnalaborist ja Andres Levaldi Siseministeeriumist, et siis saame natuke küsimusi küsida, natuke arutleda, Ewa jääb ka meiega. We'll take a short break, 3 minutes for the toilet and for some tea, and I'll invite on the stage Teele from Linnalabor and Andres from the Ministry of Interior Affairs.